All right, so we're diving into some fascinating stuff today. We've got these excerpts from Christoph Jaffrelot's Pakistan at the Crossroads. And let me tell you, this book really digs deep. It gets right into the heart of what makes Pakistan such a complex player, globally.
Yeah, Jafar really doesn't shy away from the tough stuff. Like right off the bat, he tackles the military's role in shaping Pakistan, both domestically and internationally.
It's impossible to talk about Pakistan without talking about the military, right?
Yeah,
And Jaffrelot makes this point that from the very beginning, Pakistan's identity has been tied to the sense of insecurity, especially vis-a-vis India.
absolutely. And you see that most clearly in the conflict over Kashmir. I mean, that's been a defining issue for Pakistan since day one.
Totally. It's like this unresolved tension that colors everything. And Jaffrelot argues that this sense of being under threat, of needing to defend itself against a much larger neighbor, it really pushed the military to the forefront of Pakistani society.
It's almost like they became these father figures in a way, seen as the protectors, the guarantors of Pakistan's survival.
And then, of course, you have the Cold War, which throws another wrench into the mix. I mean, Pakistan gets slapped with this label, the most allied ally, which is fascinating. What did that even mean for them at the time?
It put them right in the middle of this global power struggle. Think of it like the U.S. and the Soviet Union are playing chess on a global scale, and Pakistan, because of its strategic location, its growing military, it becomes a very important piece on that board.
So they're getting courted by the U.S., armed by the U.S., pulled into this larger game, all while trying to manage their own internal struggles in this, existential tension with India.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting because Jafrelot talks about these cycles that Pakistan goes through, these swings between military rule and attempts at civilian democratic rule.
It's like a pendulum swinging back and forth.
Right. You'll have a period of civilian government trying to establish democratic norms, and then boom, something happens, some kind of crisis, and the military steps in, often justifying it as necessary for national security.
And there were a lot of those crises, right? I mean, you have the 1965 war with India, which obviously had a huge impact.
Absolutely. And then just a few years later, the separation of East Pakistan to become Bangladesh in 1971, talk about a seismic event, that was a devastating blow, both to Pakistan's sense of itself and to the military's image.
But then, just when you think things might settle down, the Soviet-Afghan War breaks out in the 1980s, and Pakistan is pulled right back into the Cold War arena.
Right. They become this crucial ally for the U.S. in supporting the Afghan Mujahideen against the Soviets.
So it's like they're constantly being pulled in different directions, both by internal forces and by these external pressures. And speaking of internal forces, we can't forget about the ISI, Pakistan's intelligence agency. Jafrelot doesn't mince words, calling it a state within a state.
Yeah, that's a powerful image, and it speaks to the immense influence the ISI has wielded in Pakistan. I mean, they've been involved in everything from shaping security policy, particularly in relation to India, to meddling in domestic politics.
They're like this shadowy force operating behind the scenes.
Yeah. And their pursuit of what they call strategic depth, this idea of maintaining influence in Afghanistan as a buffer zone against India, that's had huge consequences for Pakistan. I mean, think about it. This whole idea of strategic depth has led the ISI to support certain militant groups, some of which have turned against Pakistan itself.
It's like they created a monster they couldn't control.
Exactly. And it raises all these questions about accountability and who's really in charge.
Right, because if even the government can't control the ISI, what hope is there for democracy to function properly?
And that's a question that Jafrelot grapples with a lot in these excerpts. He's not exactly optimistic about the state of Pakistani democracy.
Yeah, he doesn't pull any punches when it comes to the challenges facing political parties in Pakistan.
No, he doesn't. He talks about the PPP, the Pakistan People's Party, and the PMLN, the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, as these major players. But he also points out that they're constantly struggling against these huge obstacles.
What are some of those obstacles? I mean, besides the whole state within a state thing.
You've got dynastic politics, for one. These families that have dominated these parties for decades.
Like their own little kingdoms.
Right. And then there's the corruption, which is endemic. And of course, always looming in the background, you have the military ready to step in if they feel like civilian rule is failing.
So it's like even if you manage to win an election, you're walking on eggshells the whole time.
Exactly. Jafrelot brings up Nawaz Sharif, the leader of the PMLN, as an example. Sharif had this real contentious relationship with the military.
He was ousted in a coup by General Musharraf back in the 90s, right?
Yep. And Jafrelot argues that Sharif's experience in exile after that coup, It really solidified his views on the military's role in politics.
So he comes back even more determined to limit their power.
Exactly. And it wasn't just Sharif. Jaffrelot also talks about the lawyers' movement, which emerged to challenge Musharraf's rule.
The lawyers' movement, what was that all about?
So basically, it was this huge grassroots movement of lawyers, but also ordinary citizens who took to the streets to demand the restoration of the judiciary and the rule of law.
They were fed up with Musharraf's authoritarianism.
Totally. And they saw an independent judiciary as crucial for safeguarding democracy. Jaffrelot really highlights Chief Justice Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry as a pivotal figure in this.
He's the one who stood up to Musharraf, right?
Yeah, Chaudhry became a symbol of resistance, this kind of judicial superhero for a lot of Pakistanis.
Well, he certainly didn't back down from a fight. I mean, he took on everyone, from Musharraf to the political elite.
He even forced a sitting prime minister to resign over corruption allegations, which is incredible when you think about it.
So he was really trying to hold the powerful accountable. But it also makes you wonder, can the judiciary really be this lone bastion of democracy? I mean, can they really bring about lasting change on their own?
Right, because you need a functioning democracy for that. You need political parties that are willing to play by the rules, a free press, a culture of respect for the law.
So the judiciary can only do so much. It's not a magic bullet.
Exactly. But their struggle for independence is still incredibly important.
Okay, so we've talked about the military, the ISI, the challenges facing political parties, this embattled but determined judiciary. It's clear that Pakistan's internal dynamics are, to put it mildly, complicated.
That's one way to put it.
But of course, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a much larger global system, and Jaffrelot certainly doesn't shy away from exploring that.
No, he doesn't. In fact, he argues that understanding Pakistan's foreign policy is essential for understanding its domestic politics and vice versa. They're completely intertwined.
And this is where things get really interesting, because Pakistan finds itself at the center of all these competing global interests.
It's like they're constantly walking a tightrope. Jaffrelot talks about this triangular relationship between Pakistan, the U.S., and China, and how Pakistan tries to maintain ties with all three while pursuing its own strategic objectives.
Sounds like a recipe for tension.
It definitely can be. I mean, you look at the relationship with the U.S., for example. It's been incredibly fraught over the years.
It's gone through so many ups and downs, periods of close alliance, tons of financial aid, but also deep mistrust and outright hostility at times.
Jaffrelot uses this phrase. He calls it a security-oriented clientelistic relationship, which basically means that the U.S. has needed Pakistan for strategic reasons.
First during the Cold War, and then later in the War on Terror.
Right. And Pakistan, for its part, has needed the U.S. for aid and support. But that kind of transactional relationship, it doesn't exactly breed trust.
So it's like this marriage of convenience that's constantly on the verge of falling apart.
Pretty much. And it doesn't help that the U.S. and India have gotten closer over the years.
Which Pakistan sees as a direct threat.
Of course. I mean, India is their biggest rival, and they're acutely aware of the power imbalance between them. So when the U.S. strengthens ties with India, it sets off alarm bells in Islamabad.
It's like they feel caught between a rock and a hard place. And that's where China comes in, right? Jaffrelot talks about this really interesting dynamic between Pakistan and China. It's been called an all-weather friendship. And it seems like it gives Pakistan some breathing room, a way to counterbalance both India and the U.S.
It's a strategic partnership that makes sense for both sides. Pakistan gets a reliable ally, someone they can count on for diplomatic support, economic assistance, even military aid. And China gets a foothold in South Asia, access to the Indian Ocean, a way to project their power further afield.
It's interesting, though, because the U.S. has often relied on Pakistan for help in the region, like during the Cold War and the War on Terror. But at the same time, there's this underlying tension stemming from Pakistan's relationship with China. It's a tough needle to thread.
Absolutely. And Jaffrelot doesn't let us forget about the complexities within the Muslim world itself. He brings up Pakistan's balancing act between Saudi Arabia and Iran.
Yeah, talk about a geopolitical tightrope walk. You've got the Sunni-Shia divide, with Saudi Arabia as the powerhouse of the Sunni world, and Iran as the leading Shia state. And Pakistan has to somehow maintain good relations with both.
Especially since Pakistan itself has a significant Shia population. It's a balancing act, no doubt.
And it's not just about religion either, right? It's economic and political as well.
Yeah.
Pakistan depends on Saudi Arabia for financial aid, for investment, for oil. But they also have to think about their relationship with Iran, their neighbor to the west.
Jafrelot uses a really interesting example to illustrate this balancing act, the Faisal Mosque in Islamabad.
Oh, yeah, I've seen pictures. It's beautiful. It's that huge modern mosque, one of the largest in the world, right?
Right, and it was funded entirely by Saudi Arabia.
Which is a pretty powerful symbol of their relationship.
It certainly is. I mean, here you have this major landmark in Pakistan, a symbol of its Islamic identity. And it's a gift from the Saudis. It's a reminder of the close ties between the two countries, but it also highlights the delicate position Pakistan is in when it comes to Iran.
It's like walking a tightrope while juggling chainsaws. So after looking at all this, the military, the ISI, the political parties, the judiciary, the U.S., China, Saudi Arabia, Iran, it's a lot.
It really is.
It makes you wonder, can Pakistan ever really escape these external pressures and chart its own course? It's like they're constantly reacting to the latest crisis, the latest demand from a foreign power. When do they get to decide their own destiny?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Jafrelot seems to suggest that it's not just about external factors holding Pakistan back. He argues that internal factors will be just as crucial in shaping its future.
Like what? What kind of internal factors are we talking about?
Well, for one, there's the issue of strengthening democratic institutions. Can Pakistan move beyond this cycle of military coups and dynastic politics? Can they create a system where leaders are truly accountable to the people they represent?
So it's about building a more resilient democracy from within.
Exactly. And then there's the economic dimension. Pakistan has so much potential, a young population, a strategic location. But they face these huge economic challenges. Poverty, inequality, a reliance on foreign aid that often comes with strings attached.
So they need to create a more sustainable, more equitable economic model, one that actually benefits all Pakistanis, not just a select few.
Absolutely. And finally, there's the challenge of internal security. Pakistan has been grappling with militancy and terrorism for decades. And as we discussed earlier, some of those very policies pursued in the name of strategic depth have ended up backfiring, creating new security threats.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is. So the question is, can Pakistan find a way to address these security threats without undermining its own democratic values? Can they break free from this cycle of violence and instability?
It's a daunting task, to say the least. But Jafrelot seems to suggest that understanding these complexities, both internal and external, is the first step towards meaningful engagement with Pakistan.
I think that's right. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines, to view Pakistan through this narrow lens of terrorism or geopolitical rivalries. But what Jafrelot does so well is he forces us to look deeper.
To see the human side of these issues.
Exactly. To understand the aspirations of the Pakistani people, the challenges they face, the choices they have to make.
Because ultimately, that's what this deep dive has been all about. Giving you, the listener, a more nuanced, more informed perspective on Pakistan.
So that you can engage with these issues in a more meaningful way.
So the next time you come across news about Pakistan, think about this conversation. Think about the historical baggage, the internal struggles, the external pressures they face.
And ask yourself, how can we move beyond this simplistic view of Pakistan and engage with them in a way that supports a more democratic, more prosperous, and more secure future?
Because a more stable, more prosperous Pakistan benefits everyone.
Absolutely. It makes the entire world a safer, more secure place.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Pakistan's complex geopolitics.
It's been my pleasure. Always fascinating to unpack these issues with you.
Until next time.